It's a simple top with fancy sleeves, the Ruffle sleeve top from Peppermint Magazine. I've sewn it here today in a knit fabric with very little stretch, so it's soft and comfortable and did not require a serged finish. Although the pattern called for French seams, I've opted instead for regular half-inch seams. This pattern has a full bodice facing, so the V-neck has a very clean finish. Sew this easy, quick project along with me. Let's get started. Here is the wrong side of my front bodice piece, and I'm going to mark my darts. Now I can pin both of my darts in place. Sew from the outside edge to the point, leaving thread tails at the point so you can tie them in knots. Then press the formed darts downward. Now that my darts are formed, I'll place the front and back pieces right sides together. Pin the shoulder seams and the side seams. Then we'll sew the side seams and the shoulder seams with a half-inch seam allowance. For the side seams, finish the raw edges in your preferred method. And for the shoulder seams, since they'll be encased within the facing, I'm just going to press them open. Place your front and back facing pieces right sides together and align the shoulder seams and side seams. Sew these shoulder and side seams exactly as you did for the main front and back bodice pieces, sewing the shoulders at 1/2 inch and pressing them open, then sewing the side seams with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and finishing in your preferred method. To finish the bottom raw edges of the facing all the way around, I've gone ahead and pressed those bottom raw edges to the wrong side by 1/4 inch, and I'll top stitch to secure that hem in place. Here is the finished edge of the bottom of my facing. The pattern instructions have you fold it once more 1/4 inch and stitch in place just as we did initially. Because my fabric doesn't fray and I'm happy with this finish, I'm going to leave it as is. Now I'm going to place the facing and the bodice right sides together along the neckline and pin the neckline in place. Sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, pivoting at the point of the neckline. At the center V at the point in our stitching, we're going to clip to the stitching line and not beyond. We're also going to clip into the curves of the back neckline. Then we're going to understitch the facing. Turn the facing over the neckline seam allowance. And we're going to stitch along the facing side, stitching the facing to the seam allowance close to the original stitching line, all the way around the neckline. Now that that's understitched, turn the facing entirely to the inside of the garment. Give that neckline a good press. Pin the bodice and facing together around both armholes. Then baste those armholes in place all the way around. Fold your sleeves in half right sides together and pin the underarm seams. Sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and finish the raw edges in your preferred method. To prepare the sleeves to be inserted into the armhole, we have to gather the top edges slightly to ease them in. Starting about 1 inch below the notch, sew with about 1/4 inch seam allowance using the longest stitch on your machine, ending about 1 inch below the notch on the opposite side. I've turned my bodice inside out and my sleeve right side out. I'll place the sleeve into the armhole right sides together, aligning the underarm seam and the notches, and pin in place. Those basting stitches that we formed along the top of the sleeve cap can be pulled to ease the sleeve into the armhole. Note that we're not forming gathers here, we're just trying to get things to fit together. Repeat for both sleeves. Then we'll sew our sleeves into each armhole, sewing slowly and carefully so that we can smooth out any puckers as we go. Sew with a 1/2-inch seam allowance and finish the edges in your preferred method. Fold your ruffle piece right sides together and pin the short end. Sew with a 1/2-inch seam allowance and finish in your preferred method. I've gone ahead and pressed the bottom unnotched edge to the wrong side by 1/2 inch. If your fabric frays, you can also choose to tuck the raw edge to the wrong side once more by an additional 1/4 inch for a clean finish, and then edge stitch in place to finish the hem. Along the top notched edge, we're going to sew basting stitches from one side of the seam all the way around, stopping on the other side of the seam, leaving thread tails so we have threads to pull for gathering. Place your ruffle right sides together along the bottom of the sleeve, aligning the raw edges, matching the seams and matching the notches. Pull the basting stitches so that the ruffle fits the bottom of the sleeve and pin in place all the way around. Then sew the ruffle in place with a 1/2-inch seam allowance. Finish in your preferred method. The full hem allowance for the bottom of the garment is 3/4 inch. I've gone ahead and pressed that raw edge to the wrong side by 3/4 inch. If you'd like, you can choose to roll the hem by tucking the raw edge underneath to that 3/4 inch fold line. Roll it once more and you have your rolled hem. You can edge stitch in place. And now your ruffle sleeve top is complete. Thank you for watching this sew along. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future sewing tutorials, and I'll see you in the next video.